I didn't go to Kazakhstan because I had a plan. I went because I had no other options, and a man I trusted handed me a ticket out of a city that was about to arrest me. That's the truth I don't say in the interviews. The version I told for the cameras. The one Petrovich's PR people polished into a recruitment reel and ran in 17 countries was something about chasing the purest form of athletic competition on earth, about a man born for speed finally finding his arena. It played well in those 7 countries. They used it for the better part of 2 years. People recognized me in airports in 3 languages. The real version starts with an illegal luge run down Telegraph Hill at 2 in the morning, a stolen shopping cart, a blood alcohol level that a doctor later described to me as impressively sustained, and a San Francisco Police Department cruiser that I put a dent in during the landing sequence. Nobody was seriously hurt. Cruiser absorbed most of it, and whatever I absorbed, I'd dispersed enough by then that the physical consequences were minor. The legal consequences were more durable. The SFPD was thorough and patient and very interested in finding out who'd done it. Marcus Ridley, who had been sitting on the sidelines watching me make catastrophically bad decisions since we were 19 years old, showed up at my apartment door 12 hours later. He had a duffel bag. He had a plane ticket in an envelope. He had the expression of a man who has walked into a situation he already understood completely and was prepared to offer exactly one solution. Kazakhstan, he said. No, they play a sport there called rollerball. I've heard of it. They want you. The promoter's name is Alexei Petrovich. I've already been there 6 months. The money is real, Jonathan. I mean the kind of real where you don't have to think about money anymore, where you think about other things instead. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at the window, which faced an alley. And in the alley there was a police cruiser doing a slow roll through, stopping, just present. How cold is it? I asked. Cold. Coat. We were on a flight out of SFO 6 hours later. I left with the duffel bag Marcus had brought, which tells you everything about how much I was leaving behind. I want to be clear about something before I describe what rollerball actually is, because people who've only encountered it through the broadcast version, the lights, the crowd noise, the edited highlight reels that Petrovich's production team put together for the streaming packages, don't understand what they're watching. They think it's a sport. It is not a sport, in any sense I would defend with a straight face. A sport has rules designed to keep the players alive between competitions. Rollerball has rules designed to make the players' continued survival seem like an ongoing surprise. The distinction matters. It matters in the way that the difference between a stage magic show and something that actually disappears objects matters. The form looks identical until you understand the mechanism. The arena is a banked oval track, roughly the footprint of a small stadium, with a magnetic rail running the inner perimeter at floor level. The ball is steel, slightly smaller than a bowling ball, magnetized and capable of being accelerated along the rail by a series of electromagnetic pulse coils built into the track surface. Full charge, the ball moves at approximately 90 kilometers per hour. The coil system is what gives the game its particular violence. The ball doesn't just roll, it arrives. Players on inline skates pursue it, intercept it, carry it, absorb contact from other players and from the ball itself, and deposit it in a goal mounted on a hydraulic stanchion at each end of the oval. Motorcycles run the interior of the track. The motorcycles exist, as far as I was ever able to determine, purely to provide an additional category of thing that can end you. There are rules, written ones in a document. You cannot deliberately target the neck or spine. You cannot introduce a weapon. You cannot hold another player off skates for more than 3 seconds. I say, there are rules rather than the rules are enforced, because the distinction is important. The referees were on Petrovich's payroll. The broadcast showed what Petrovich's production team decided you would see. The rules existed as a document that could be pointed to when a governing body in a European country raised concerns, and that document did the work it was designed to do, which was to provide cover. Rules, as a lived reality inside the arena, were a different matter. I learned all of this gradually, over the first 2 months, in the way that you come to understand most things that are working against you. Not through a single revelation, but through the accumulation of small incidents. each of which you explain away individually, each of which makes sense in isolation, and which you only understand collectively when the picture is complete, and you're already inside it. First week I was there, I thought rollerball was the most extraordinary thing I'd ever encountered. I was not wrong about the extraordinary part. I was wrong about nearly everything else. The Jambil horsemen played out of a compound an hour's drive outside the capital. That sentence contains all the relevant information, even before I add that the compound had a perimeter fence, guards who were on rotation, and a main gate with a keypad access system. None of the players had the code to that keypad. The dormitories were institutional, but not uncomfortable. Practice track was excellent. Better than anything I'd trained on in the States. The cafeteria was adequate. The weight facility was first-rate. Everything needed to keep a team of professional athletes at peak physical performance was present and well-maintained. What was absent was a door you could open from the inside. Borovich described the security to us on the first orientation day, standing in the compound courtyard in a suit that communicated a level of expenditure I associated with men who'd never had to worry about expenditure. He was a tall man, well-maintained, with the kind of accent that suggested he'd deliberately smoothed the sharpest edges of his native speech to make himself comprehensible to Western media. He explained that we were, in his operation, valuable assets, and that valuable assets required protection. He said it warmly. He meant it as a business proposition. The warmth and the business proposition were not contradictory to him. I didn't understand that at the time. In this region, he said, certain parties would find value in disrupting our operations. The security measures protect you. They protect your families. They protect the integrity of the competition. He smiled. You are here to play. Everything else is handled. Everything else is handled. I've thought about that sentence many times since. It was the most accurate thing he ever said to me. I met Aurora the second day of practice. She was already established on the team, one of the few women in professional rollerball, which tells you something about her before you know anything else, because the sports selection process was primarily about identifying people willing to absorb serious and repeated physical punishment in exchange for financial compensation, and then finding the subset of those people who were also capable of performing at elite athletic levels. The intersection of those two sets was not large. She was in it. She was fast in a way that looked effortless, until you skated alongside her and realized you were working twice as hard to match half her speed. She could read the ball's trajectory off the magnetic pulse before it was visually trackable, a skill that usually developed over 6 months of competitive play, as though she had a sense specifically attuned to metal in motion. On the track, she was decisive in the way that separates players who trust their bodies from players who still have to negotiate with themselves in real time. Off the track, she was quiet in the particular way that people are quiet when they've learned that speaking about certain things is expensive. I recognized it before I could have named it. Quality you see in people who've done extended time in environments where information is a resource controlled by someone else, where what you know and what you say about what you know are two different calculations. Veterans have it. People who've been through difficult legal situations have it. Anyone who has spent long enough somewhere that transparency is a vulnerability develops it. I didn't push. We skated together, learned each other's rhythms on the track, and eventually she started talking in the way she did most things. Efficiently, without anything extra. How long have you been here? I asked her. About 3 weeks in, after a practice session that had run 2 hours past scheduled end time, because Petrovich crew had wanted broadcast footage. 18 months. She said. Where you from originally? She told me. Eastern European. A city I'd heard of, but couldn't have placed precisely on a map. She'd come because Petrovich's scouts had found her at a regional skating scene competition and made her an offer that made her current circumstances seem obviously inferior by comparison. This was, I would come to understand, the standard recruitment story. The scouts were good at their job. The offer was always tailored. Do you like it here? I asked. She looked at me with the flat patience of someone who has been asked a question with a self-evident answer, by someone who hasn't yet realized the answer is self-evident. I like skating, she said. She went back toward the dormitory corridor. She stood on the practice track for a while, listening to the coils cool down, and tried to decide what she'd meant by the distinction. I told myself I was probably reading into it. I was not reading into it. The money was real. Petrovich paid on Smechiel in amounts that converted favorably at the rates available in the compound's administrative office. And he paid performance bonuses for what he called signature moments, his term for any play that generated a measurable spike in the broadcast ratings. Cast ran on a streaming platform that was technically outside the jurisdiction of most content regulation authorities, which was not an accident. A spike in ratings meant you'd done something that made viewers lean toward their screens. The most reliable way to generate a spike was to put yourself in a situation where the probability of serious physical harm was high, and then not experience it. Second most reliable was to experience it on camera. Petrovich had developed metrics for both. Sanjay, who was Petrovich's assistant, and the man who actually ran the operational machinery of the whole enterprise, had the spreadsheets. I should have paid more attention to Sanjay from the start, but he had the quality of seeming secondary. He was compact, precise, perpetually positioned slightly behind Petrovich's left shoulder, perpetually with a tablet in his hands. He wore clothes that didn't quite fit and had the permanent expression of a man running calculations. Not dramatic calculations, routine ones, the kind you run because the data is there and habit demands you process it. When Petrovich spoke publicly, Sanjay listened and noted. When Sanjay spoke, which was rarely and always quietly and always to Petrovich directly, Petrovich listened with the careful attention of a man who understood that the person speaking had information he didn't. The dynamic between them, the showman and the actuary, the face and the machine behind the face, told you what the operation actually was if you were watching it. I wasn't watching it. I was playing rollerball. I was without false modesty about it. Very good at the game. I had the spatial instinct that lets you track multiple high-speed objects simultaneously. The ball, the motorcycles, the positions of 12 other players, without consciously cataloging each element. I had the speed that either exists in you or doesn't, and a tolerance for physical contact that in retrospect probably indicated something worth examining, but in the context of rollerball was purely an asset. These qualities, assembled in a sport designed to reward exactly them, produced results that Petrovich's cameras documented enthusiastically, and that Sanjay's spreadsheets translated into advertising rate increases. Within 3 months, I was what the promotional materials described as the face of the Jambel horseman. Within 4, I was appearing on streaming platform banners in 6 countries. Within 5, Petrovich had me in a commercial for a Central Asian energy drink, standing in front of the track in my gear, saying something in English about limits and what happens when you push past them. I was paid extra for that one. The irony of the script didn't land for me until much later. Marcus and I settled into a rhythm that was superficially comfortable and was actually the rhythm of 2 people who are adapting to a situation without having fully inventoried what they've adapted to. We were the 2 Americans on a roster of mostly local players and a handful of other internationals who'd arrived by various roads. The local players earned a fraction of what we made. Not a small fraction, a large one. Structured into the contract tiers in a way that Petrovich lawyers had clearly thought through carefully. They skated harder and absorbed more contact because the bonus structures incentivized risk and they needed the bonuses more. Their contracts had provisions that an immigration lawyer Marcus eventually spoke to described as almost certainly unenforceable in Western jurisdictions, but this is not a Western jurisdiction. The local players had been inside this machine longer than we had. They knew its shape. They were polite about our ignorance, in the particular way that people are polite about ignorance, when explaining it to the ignorant person won't change the structural situation. Dmitri was the one who came closest to telling me directly. He was a winger, mid-30s, built like someone who'd been compressed by repeated impact events into something denser than his original material. He had a wife and 2 sons in Jambel proper, and he skated with the specific quality of a man who has assessed the risk clearly found the calculation survivable, and is monitoring it continuously for the point at which it changes. He wasn't resigned. He was watchful, which is a different thing. We were in the cafeteria about 7 weeks in. I'd been watching a replay on the monitor mounted behind the food line. A collision from the previous game in which a player from the Almaty Wolves, their starting ball carrier, had taken a steel ball impact to the unprotected left side of his head and left the track on a medical board. The cameras had caught it from 3 angles. It had generated a significant rating spike. Sanjay had noted it. That was bad, I said. Dmitri looked at the monitor without visible reaction. His helmet strap, he said. Bout it. He looked at me then, not confrontationally. Patience of a man. Explaining something to someone who is about to understand something they won't be able to ununderstand. The strap was not right before the game, he said. And in the game it was worse. He looked back at his food. These things happen, he said. He said it in the tone people use when they mean the precise opposite of what they're saying. When they mean, this thing was constructed to happen. This was not an accident in the statistical sense of events that occur without deliberate cause. This was an accident in the useful sense of an event that serves someone's purpose and can be called an accident afterward. Sat with that for 3 days before I told Marcus. Marcus already knew. He'd arrived at it before I had. Because Marcus is more patient than me and more willing to sit with an uncomfortable inference and trace it to its logical destination before he says anything about it. He'd started with the cameras, specifically with the editorial choices in the broadcast, which he'd been watching not as entertainment, but as a document. The angles that anticipated certain collisions, tight shots that appeared on a player right before something happened to them. The statistical improbability of the production crew being that consistently fortunate in their framing, unless someone was telling them where to point the lens. Sanjay, Marcus said, when I finally got to his room. The assistant? He's not an assistant. He runs the actual operation. Petrovich is the face. Sanjay manages the performance. He set down the tablet he'd been using to review broadcast footage. The rating spikes after injuries are too consistent to be coincidence, Jonathan. There's a pattern that doesn't occur naturally. The injuries are being planned. That's not. I started and then stopped because I'd been about to say it wasn't possible, and sitting there in that room, I couldn't build that sentence to a conclusion I believed. The helmet straps, I said instead. That's one method. There are others. The motorcycle routes during certain play sequences. The specific opponents deployed against specific players during specific moments in specific games. He had written this down in a notebook, which I found characteristic of him. Marcus processes things by making them legible on paper. The notebook had 3 weeks of entries. Petrovich and Sanjay have built a system for managing which players get hurt, when and how badly. It drives viewership. They treat it like an editorial decision. I sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the floor for a long time. We leave, I said. It's not that simple. It is that simple. We pack our things, we go to the gate, we tell the guards we're done, and we need a vehicle to the airport. Marcus reached to his nightstand without looking and picked up a document. Contracts. He opened to a page he'd already marked with a strip of tape and held it out. I read the relevant clause. Then I read it again slowly, in case my first reading was missing something that would make it less than what it appeared to be. It wasn't missing anything. The clause addressed termination. Specifically, it addressed the rights retained by Petrovich's organization in the event a player attempted to terminate the agreement without promoter consent. The language addressed monetary penalties that would require a decade to satisfy. It addressed civil injunctions that could be pursued in Kazakhstani courts. It referenced 17 provisions of local commercial law. And near the bottom, in the section dealing with what the document called unauthorized departure, there was a line that Petrovich's lawyers had put there the way you put something in a document when you want to make sure the reader understands the full range of what they've agreed to. Player acknowledges that unauthorized departure from the performance zone may be treated as abandonment of contractual obligations, with all consequent legal and operational remedies pursued at the organization's full discretion. Operational remedies. Yeah, Marcus said, watching me read it. We can't just leave. We cannot just leave, he confirmed. What about the embassy? The satellite phone logs calls. I checked. And the nearest embassy with jurisdiction over our situation is 12 hours by road. And the road goes through 3 checkpoints with staff who are on very good terms with Petrovich's security company. I put the contract on the bed. Aurora, I said. She's been here 14 months. She figured out what we figured out approximately 2 months after she arrived. She can't leave either. Same structure. Different numbers. We didn't panic. I want to be precise about that. Panic was the available emotional response, and it was useless. You panic in an enclosed system. You make noise. Noise draws attention, and attention in that compound resolved eventually to Petrovich's awareness. We'd seen what happened when Petrovich's awareness was drawn to a problem. It was resolved in ways that made examples. Kept playing. We kept performing. I kept being the face of the Jambel horseman and generating signature moments and watching Sanjay's tablet light up with rating notifications. We watched. We waited. We tried to find the seam in the structure that would let us out. What we found, instead, was that the structure had been designed by someone who'd thought about seams. 3 weeks after Marcus showed me the contract, a player named Kasem took a motorcycle impact to his right knee during a home match. It looked, from trackside, like the kind of collision that happens when you're operating at high speed in a confined space with vehicles. It happened in front of approximately 38,000 people and some 7 million broadcast viewers. The cameras were in position. The angle was favorable. The rating spike was, according to the numbers Sanjay's documentation later confirmed, the second highest single incident spike of that season. Kasim didn't play again. He left compound 8 days later, walking with assistance with a settlement payment and a release from his contract. He was the only member of the Horsemen's roster in 3 years to leave with a voluntary release. He paid for it with his knee, which is one way to read the exit clause. I told Aurora what Marcus and I had concluded about a week after Kasem left. We were on the practice track, late afternoon, working on positioning drills. I told her methodically, the way you deliver information you want to be heard clearly. I told her about the cameras, about the helmet straps, about Marcus's notebook, about the contract clause. She listened, with her arms crossed, and the expression of someone receiving an analysis they've already arrived at independently. I know, she said. How long? I said, 2 months in. Why didn't you? What would you have done with it 2 months in? She asked. It wasn't rhetorical exactly. It was the actual question. What would you have done differently if I'd told you the same day I figured it out? I thought about it honestly. Nothing, I said. Right. So I told you when it would be useful for you to know. Which is now, when you can compare notes with Marcus and maybe start thinking about something other than getting out. What's other than getting out? She looked at me for a moment with the considered expression she had when she was deciding how much to say. Getting out is what you do when there's a door, she said. When there isn't a door, you do something else. She went back to the drill. I skated alongside her and thought about what she meant by something else, and didn't reach a conclusion for several more weeks. The escape attempt happened 7 weeks after Marcus showed me the contract. I don't call it that to understate it. I call it that because that's what it was. And what it was is important to understand. Because why it failed is important to understand. And why it failing changed what we tried next. It was a group effort. Marcus and me, Aurora, Beksat, and a pumper named Timur who'd been with the Horsemen 4 years and had family reasons to want to be somewhere else that he didn't discuss in detail, but that the way he talked about the timeline made clear were pressing. Beksat had a cousin with a vehicle and knowledge of a route that avoided the main road. The plan was, by necessity, low technology. We moved at night during a shift change we'd mapped over 2 weeks. We got through the secondary fence at a point Timur had identified through careful attention to guard timing over the course of a month. We got 60 meters past the main gate. I still don't know who tipped Petrovich's people. I've gone back through it many times. Who knew what, when, what was said to whom? Who might have been watched without knowing it? Whether the information came from a person or from a surveillance system I hadn't identified. I genuinely don't know. It's possible someone talked. It's possible a camera I hadn't mapped saw something. It's possible Petrovich had simply anticipated the attempt, had built the timeline in his head, knew roughly when players at our level of awareness would try it, and had people in position accordingly. He was thorough in the way that people are thorough when other people's freedom is a variable that threatens their revenue model. What I remember is headlights appearing ahead of us, and then being separated from the group efficiently and without drama, the way things are done by professionals who do them regularly. The separation was the worst part. Not what followed, which was a room I won't describe in detail, but the moment when the group that had been together split and each person disappeared in a different direction, and you didn't know what was happening to anyone else. Petrovich came to see me the following morning. He was courteous as he always was. He had a chair brought into the room. He sat in it with the posture of a man who is mildly disappointed in a subordinate, but not surprised, who has been here before and knows the shape of the conversation. His suit was the kind that cost money that I couldn't translate into anything meaningful. His English was deliberate and precise, slightly accented in a way he'd cultivated, rather than failed to eliminate. "Jonathan," he said, "I have given you total freedom, even satellite television." He said it with a faint smile that indicated he understood the absurdity and found it acceptable. "You are a remarkable talent. The numbers, when you are on the track, are remarkable. No pleasure in difficult situations." "I want to leave," I said. "I understand that," he said. "And I want you to understand that wanting something and having it are not always compatible. You are too valuable to release at this time. In perhaps 8 months, when the season ends and the broadcast contracts roll over, we can discuss what a transition would look like. For now, you are here. You can't hold us here indefinitely. I am not holding you here. Your contract holds you here." "Oh, the contract." He stood and straightened his jacket with the small automatic gesture of a man who maintains his appearance as a professional tool. "There is a match in 5 days. I expect your full effort. The audience has expectations, and the audience's expectations are the foundation of everything we've built here." He moved toward the door. Then he stopped. "Jonathan, the people you went out with, I hope this experience has clarified the situation for them, as well as for you. Some of them have family in the region. That's worth remembering." He left. The door was not locked after him. That was the detail I sat with the longest. That he left the door unlocked, because the lock was in the contract, and the geography, and the armed men at the gate, and a door was unnecessary. I didn't tell Marcus all of what Petrovich said in that room. I told him the operative parts. Marcus listened with the careful expression he has when he's processing something, and then he was quiet for a while, and then he said, "The final match." "What about it?" "The season finale. The Wolves here at home. It's in 3 weeks. You know what Petrovich and Sanjay have planned for it." I did know. Everyone in the compound knew by that point. Bad news in an enclosed space circulates in the way that water fills a vessel, not through channels, through everything at once. The season finale was going to be different in kind rather than degree. Petrovich and Sanjay had determined that. The season needed a final event that would set a viewership record, generate the kind of clip traffic that the streaming platform would benefit from for the following year's negotiation cycle. They were going to remove the rules, not loosen them, not selectively enforce them, remove them. There would be no referee calls. There would be no prohibited conduct. What happened on the track would happen. "They're staging a mass casualty event," I said. "They're staging a spectacle," Marcus said. "Which is the same thing to them, yes. How do we stop it?" He looked at me for a long moment. "We don't stop it," he said. "We change what it is." I want to explain what Marcus meant by that clearly, because it's the thing I've thought about more than anything else from that period. And I've thought about it differently over the years, as I've understood it better. He didn't mean that we escape the match. He didn't mean that we refuse to participate in a way that gives a cause to invoke the contract's operational remedies clause. He meant something specific, that we play the match, but we play it differently than Petrovich intended it to be played. And we play it in a way that makes the audience understand what they're actually watching. 'Cause the audience didn't know. That was the fact that none of us had fully focused on, because we'd been too occupied with trying to find an exit that didn't exist. 8 or 9 million people watching the rollerball broadcast understood themselves to be watching a dangerous sport. Something the participants had chosen. Something that operated within a framework of accepted risk. They had seen players injured. They had seen players leave the track on medical equipment. They had processed this as the cost of the game, the cost that made it worth watching, the thing the player signed up for, and that distinguished the sport from safer entertainment. They had no knowledge of the helmet straps being cut before matches. They had no knowledge of the motorcycle patterns being coordinated to produce specific collision outcomes. They had no knowledge of Sanjay's spreadsheet, of the rating impact analysis that treated player injuries as production decisions. They were watching a thing without understanding what the thing was. If you could show them, not tell them, not publish an article they'd see later, but show them, in real time in the arena, with cameras on, you changed the nature of what they were participating in as an audience. You turned spectators into witnesses. Witnesses have a different relationship to the event they've observed. They carry it differently. The 3 weeks between that conversation and the match were the longest I've spent inside a situation I wasn't certain I'd leave. I want to be accurate about my internal state during those weeks, because I think accuracy matters here. And I've told cleaner versions of this story before. I was afraid. I wasn't afraid continuously. There are enough demands on your attention in daily athletic life to give fear a lot of competition. But it was there as a baseline, a low frequency I was aware of the way you're aware of a sound in a building that's always running. I was also angry, in the particular sustained way that sets in when you've been living inside a confined space long enough that the anger has stopped being reactive and started being structural. Sure. And alongside those things, which were straightforward, I was working through something more complicated, which was what it meant to choose to do. A thing you knew was dangerous when you couldn't be certain what it would produce. Aurora found me the night before the match on the practice track. The main lights were off, only the maintenance illumination, low and blue, enough to skate by. I was doing slow laps, not practicing anything, just moving in the space, because movement was better than being still. She came in without announcing herself and matched my pace. We skated for a while without talking. Pulse coils were cold and silent. The arena felt entirely different, empty, larger and quieter and more honest, somehow, than when it was full, and the noise and the lights were doing Petrovich's work. I want to trade you to the Wolves for the match, I said. She didn't respond immediately. Truvich will agree if I ask him to. He wants me cooperative for tomorrow. He'll move you out of the Horseman lineup in exchange for my commitment to play at full effort. That's not your decision, she said. I know that. If you trade me without asking, you're deciding what I risk without my consent, which is the same structure we've been living inside, just with you as the administrator instead of Petrovich. I stopped skating. She stopped with me, in the low-maintenance light, in the arena that was going to be different in 12 hours. I'm asking, I said. That's why I'm telling you. I'm asking you whether you want to not be in the middle of whatever tomorrow is. The quiet she had then wasn't the processing kind. She'd already processed it. It was the quiet before the thing you've decided becomes a thing you've said. Ask him, she said. I'll play for the Wolves. I'll be on the other side of the track. She looked at me steadily, with the direct quality she had when she wasn't managing her words. And don't use it as an excuse to do less than everything tomorrow. Don't protect me and then play it safe. That's not what this is for. We didn't touch, skated, until the building systems came on at midnight, and we went back to the dormitories separately. I went to Petrovich's office at 7 the next morning. Sanjay was positioned at his left shoulder. I made the offer, full effort, full cooperation with the broadcast requirements, whatever the cameras needed, in exchange for Aurora being moved to the Wolves match roster for this event only. Player transfer was within Petrovich's administrative authority. It cost him nothing operationally. Petrovich looked at Sanjay. Sanjay looked at his tablet. Some calculation happened that I couldn't observe, agreed, Petrovich said. He was satisfied. Could see it in the way he held himself. The small easing of something that had been slightly tense. He thought he had resolved the problem. He'd traded a temporary lineup adjustment for the performance of his marquee player in the highest stakes event of the season. And he'd gotten it cheaply, and the marquee player was walking out of his office compliant and settled. The situation was contained. He was looking at a man who had stopped trying to escape and started trying to change what the match was going to be. He didn't know that yet. The arena that evening was, by attendance records, the largest crowd the compound had ever hosted. 41,000 people. The atmospheres was the particular atmosphere of an event that has been promoted as something unprecedented. A charge in the air that was partly excitement and partly something less comfortable that people weren't quite articulating to themselves. The broadcast was live on the streaming platform with a viewership that Sanjay's later released documentation confirmed at 9.3 million at peak. Petrovic had done his job. He'd built the largest possible audience for what he intended to be a controlled execution, dressed as sport. The Wolves came out first. I saw Aurora in their lineup in their team colors across the oval. She looked at me once across the distance between us, and her expression was the most complicated thing I've seen on another person's face. Not afraid, not resentful, not hopeful in a soft sense. Someone who has placed a bet that they understand fully and is waiting for the outcome without pretending they know it. Horsemen followed. Marcus behind me, Dimitri, Beksit, Timur, the others. Men who had been inside this machine longer than we had, who'd been running the calculation of risk and necessity every season, and who'd felt the calculation shift. Pulse coils charged. The ball entered the track. Crowd noise reached the frequency it reaches when the event has finally started, and everyone can stop anticipating it. For the first 6 minutes, I played normally. I played at the level the cameras and the broadcast expected. I made the plays I was capable of making, and I made them completely, because I needed the footage to exist, needed the broadcast to be running, needed the cameras to be on, and the audience to be present. Before what came next could be what it needed to be. Points on the board. I took contact. I was for 6 minutes what Petrovic had paid me to be. Then a Wolves player, number 11, went down. He was a forward I'd watched in previous matches. A Kazakhstani national 20s, fast footwork. His helmet failed on the left side in a way that no impact I'd witnessed had caused. The strap gave. He went down hard in the way people go down when the head makes unmediated contact with the track surface, and he didn't bounce back. He lay still for 2 full seconds, which is an infinity of time on a moving track with live motorcycles. Then he got up. He was bleeding, and his orientation was visibly off, but he got up, and he skated to the barrier, and he sat down on it. And he looked at the helmet in his hands with an expression that was genuinely confused, and genuinely frightened, and completely unguarded. The face of a man who does not understand what has just happened to him. The cameras cut away. The broadcast monitor at the track's apex, switching from a tight shot of number 11 to a wide shot of the play continuing elsewhere. Sanjay's production crew exercising editorial control. I stopped playing. I skated to number 11 at the barrier. I took the helmet from his hands. I held it up toward the nearest camera mount. Not toward the crowd. Toward the camera, knowing the lens was tight and the broadcast was live, and 9 million people had a close view of whatever the camera saw. The strap hadn't frayed, hadn't snapped under impact. It had been cut with something sharp, at a point that ensured it would hold during warm-up and fail under game stress. The camera cut away again. I skated to the next camera mount, held it up. Psst. Marcus had understood what was happening before I'd taken 3 strides. He moved to the near side barrier, removed his own helmet, and held it toward a camera, showing the interior, showing the padding that had been partially removed from the left side, reducing its protective capacity in a way that was invisible from outside, but would have been immediately apparent to anyone who'd fitted helmets professionally. I hadn't known he'd found that. He hadn't told me, because we hadn't been able to have a conversation in those last hours, but he'd been looking at the equipment the same way I'd been looking at it, and he'd found something different. Crowd noise changed frequency, not louder, not quieter, different, in the way that rooms change when the dynamic in them changes. When people stop being in the presence of entertainment and start being in the presence of information. Exit skated to the center of the track and sat down. He just sat on the track surface. in the middle of a live match, with 9.3 million viewers watching and 41,000 people in the arena. He sat down the way you sit down when you've decided that standing up inside someone else's performance is no longer something you're willing to do. Dmitry skated to the center and sat down next to him. Two more of the Horsemen locals, Timur, then players from the Wolves side, not all of them, not instantly, but one and then another, players I didn't know, who were watching what was happening and deciding in real time which side of it they were on. The motorcycles braked. The ball rolled to a stop against the rail. Pulse coils went quiet, in the way they go quiet when no one is engaging the track. A settling hum down to silence. Aurora was the last one from the Wolves side. She skated to the center of the track and sat down with the rest of them. And she looked at me across the track. And I got on the barrier rail and stood up. I don't know what I looked like from the crowd's perspective. I know what I was, which was a man with a sabotaged helmet in each hand. Mine and number 11's. And 8 months of accumulated anger that had found the correct place to put itself. I didn't plan what I said. I said it. I told them what Petrovich and Sanjay had built. I told them about the helmet straps, and the camera positions, and the rating spreadsheets. Told them about Kasim's knee, and the players who'd left in settlements, and the players who hadn't left at all. I told them about the fence with the keypad none of us had the code for, and the contract clause that called leaving an operational liability, and the satellite phone logs. I told them about the attempted escape, and what had happened after it, without detail. Because the detail wasn't the point. Point was the structure. The point was that the people sitting on the track behind me had been inside that structure, some of them for years, and had not consented to what the structure was designed to produce. I spoke in English, which roughly half the arena understood directly. The broadcast had simultaneous translation running into 6 languages. I spoke slowly enough that the meaning transmitted regardless of which version people were hearing. The arena held 41,000 people, and it was very quiet. Afterward, the broadcast logs indicated, I spoke for 4 minutes and 22 seconds. It felt shorter than that, and longer than that simultaneously. Which is a thing that happens when you're doing something you've been working up to for months. And the doing of it takes less time than the working up. Petrovich's security personnel moved first. The men stationed at the arena perimeter, who wore security identification, but were not security in any sense that implied crowd protection. They moved toward the track access points. The crowd moved second, not as an organized response, not as a mob with a plan, not violently. In the distributed way that crowds move, when the threshold of understanding has been crossed, and the threshold has converted shock into action. People were standing. People were pointing. People were filming with personal devices, and the footage from those personal devices was going to platforms that were not Petrovich's broadcast infrastructure, and that Sanjay's production team had no editorial authority over. Marcus positioned himself between the track access and Petrovich's approaching security. He stood there with a composure I will not find adequate words for. The composure of a man who has been afraid for a sustained period and has decided that the fear has run its course, and he is done accommodating it. Dmitry was beside him, Bexat. 3 Wolves players. The line was not aggressive. It was present. It said, this is where the track ends and the intervention begins. And we are on this side of it. Petrovich came down from his box. I saw him moving through the corridor below the stands. Same suit, same posture, same careful bearing. Sanjay was not with him. We learned later that Sanjay had left through the service exit approximately 40 seconds after I began speaking. He had a vehicle. He had a route. He got 14 kilometers before encountering a secondary perimeter that, it turned out, the relevant Kazakhstani authorities had established 3 days earlier on the basis of information received through a channel I've never been able to identify with certainty. He cooperated extensively in exchange for a reduced outcome. He was the kind of man who processed the world as a series of optimal decisions, and when the optimal decision changed, he adjusted without apparent difficulty. Petrovich made it to the track level. He stood at the access gate and looked across the oval to where I was still standing, on the barrier rail. Crowd was on its feet. The broadcast was live. Personal device footage was already circulating. on platforms he didn't control. He looked at me across the oval with an expression I've tried to describe to people and mostly failed. Not rage, he was too controlled for rage. Not calculation, because I think the calculation had already completed, and he knew the result. It was closer to the expression of a man confronting the fact that a structure he'd designed to be sound has failed. Not because someone found a clever way through it, but because enough people inside it simply stopped participating. He had built a machine. The machine ran on our performance. We had stopped performing. I dropped the two helmets at the center of the track. The sound they made, two hollow steel objects landing on a concrete surface in a large enclosed space, was small and specific, and the broadcast equipment picked it up clearly. A sound that didn't match the scale of the space it was inside. The crowd came over the barrier, not in a rush. In the way that people move when a boundary that had seemed solid has been identified as contingent, and they're testing it, and finding it gives way. Bodies filling space. The track stopped being a performance venue and became what it physically was, which was a surface that anyone could stand on. Coils stayed quiet. The ball sat still on the rail. What happened to Petrovich and Sanjay afterward is a matter of public record across 3 jurisdictions, and I won't spend pages on the legal process, because the legal process, while satisfying in its outcomes, is not what this story is about. The machine he'd built required our ongoing performance as fuel and could not run without it. When we stopped, it stopped. The advertising contracts ended. Broadcast agreements were voided by the streaming platform's legal team within the week, with a speed that suggested they'd had lawyers on this possibility for some time. The Kazakhstani authorities, who had apparently been waiting for something concrete enough to act on without triggering the international complications that Petrovich's organizational structure had been designed to create, received what they needed. Sanjay's documents filled 12 binders and 3 terabytes. Engineers are useful people even when they've been engineering toward the wrong ends. The compound players were released from their contracts in the weeks following. The local players, Dmitry, Beksat, Timur, the others, had the exit they'd been unable to find for years. Dmitry went home to his wife and sons in Jambel. His knee, from a collision 2 seasons earlier, that had never been adequately treated inside the compound's medical setup, needed surgery that the settlement eventually covered. Beksat stayed in Kazakhstan. I've heard he does good work in athletics administration at the national level. I believe it. Marcus flew back to the States within the month. He eventually got the NHL tryout he'd come to Kazakhstan to fund. He didn't make the final roster, but played 3 seasons in the minors, which he told me was the happiest he'd been on skates. Aurora left the country about a month after I did. I won't say where she went, because where she went is hers. We talked once at length over a phone call that ran longer than either of us had planned, about what the 14 months had cost and what the 4 minutes at the center of the track had been worth. It didn't resolve into a lesson or a balance sheet. It resolved into the fact of 2 people who had been in a place where they were treated as resources and had both in the end declined to continue being that, and that declining had been sufficient. What I carry from it is simpler than I expected. It's not the fear which faded with time and distance. It's not the anger which also faded, though more slowly. It's the thing Marcus said when I asked how we stop the match. That we don't stop it, we change what it is. I've turned that over many times since. He meant something specific and tactical in that moment, but it turned out to be true in a larger sense. The only leverage we had was our presence in that arena. The machine needed us there, and performing. The moment we were there, and not performing. The moment we were there, and insisting, in public, with witnesses, that what was happening was actually happening, the machine had no use for us, and could not run. 9 million witnesses turned out to be enough. I didn't know going in that the number would be sufficient. I don't know what the number would have been if it wasn't. I only know what happened. And what happened was that we sat down on a track and held up a helmet and told the truth in front of whoever was watching, and it was enough. The last thing I remember clearly from inside the arena is the sound of the helmets hitting the track, small and specific and hollow in that large space. Then the crowd coming over the barrier, not in anger but in presence, just filling space that had been controlled. and the coils going silent, and the arena becoming, for the first time since I'd arrived, simply a room that people could stand in. I've been in a lot of rooms since then. I'm in one now, writing this, which is just a room. It turns out that's what you're fighting for. In the end, the right to be in a room that nobody locked from the outside. The right to decide when you leave. We decided, we left, that was enough. People ask me sometimes whether I regret going. I've heard the question in enough forms by now to know what they're really asking. Which is whether the thing was worth the cost. I don't have a clean answer to that. I have the one I carry, which is that I'm here, and the machine is not, and that the people who were inside it with me are living their lives somewhere, outside a compound with a keypad gate and a contract clause that called their freedom an operational liability. I don't know if I would do it differently given the choice again. I know I wouldn't have done the 4 minutes at the center of the track differently. That part I'm certain of, everything before it, the original decision, the slow months of not understanding, the escape attempt, and what followed, those I examine differently depending on the day. What I know clearly is this. We were in a system that required our performance to function. The system had been designed to be inescapable, and it was, in the conventional sense. You couldn't go over it or around it or through it. What we finally did, the only thing that worked, was stop performing inside it and make the audience understand why. Not explain it to them afterward. Show them in real time, in the arena, while the cameras were rolling and the crowd was present. Let them be there for the thing itself. That's not a tactic anyone teaches you. There's no manual for what to do when the exit is locked, and the guards are professional, and the contract has 17 citations to local commercial law. Provides. You find the thing the machine requires and you withhold it. You make the withholding visible. You trust that enough people watching will understand what they're seeing. We trusted it and it held. I've skated since, occasionally, recreationally, on surfaces that don't have pulse coils or motorcycles or men with tablets, noting the revenue implications of my continued physical integrity. Feels different now. Cleaner. Just movement. Just the surface under your feet and the air moving past you, with no one watching, and nothing at stake except the thing itself. I like it better that way. Marcus and I talked a few months after it was all finished, when enough distance had accumulated that we could look back at the shape of it. He said something I've turned over many times since. He said, the worst part wasn't being trapped. The worst part was performing like we weren't. He was right. The performing was the cost that compounded daily. Living inside the gap between what was actually happening and the story being told about it was what wore at you in ways the physical punishment didn't. When we stopped performing, even just on that track, even just for 4 minutes, the gap closed. What was happening and what people understood was happening became the same thing. That's what the 4 minutes were actually about, underneath the helmets and the cameras. They were about closing the gap. Without the months before them, the 4 minutes are just a man on a barrier rail, making a speech. With the months, there's something else. They're a man who ran out of other options, and found that the last remaining one was also the one that worked. I'll take it. There's a practical note I want to add, because practical notes are often where the real information lives. In the weeks after the final match, while the lawyers were doing what lawyers do and the authorities were doing what authorities do, and Sanjay was doing what Sanjay did in exchange for his reduced outcome, several journalists contacted me for interviews. I declined most of them. The ones I agreed to, I said the same thing in different arrangements of the same words. We held up the helmets and told the truth, and 9 million people watched, and it was enough. One journalist, a woman from a German public station who had been covering Central Asian sports for a decade, asked me what I thought would have happened if the broadcast had been cut completely, if Sanjay's team had managed to kill the feed before I began talking. I thought about it for a while. 41,000 people were still in the arena, I said. That's a lot of witnesses, she said. That's what I thought, I said. You only need enough. Enough people who are present and understand what they've seen and cannot ununderstand it. The number doesn't have to be 9 million. It just has to be enough that the thing that happened can't be made into something that didn't happen. She printed that. It's the most accurate thing I've said. in a print interview. The night after the final match, after the arena had emptied and the authorities had come, and the compound had become something different from what it had been. Not yet free, not fully processed, but changed in an irreversible direction. I went to the practice track one more time. The lights were off. The coils were cold. The ball was somewhere in the maintenance area, not on the rail. I skated for an hour by myself in the dark, which was the same thing I'd been doing the night before. The space was the same. The surface was the same. My skates were the same. The difference was that the gate was going to open in the morning, and I was going to walk through it. I thought about the shopping cart on Telegraph Hill, about how young I'd been, how convinced I was that speed was the point, that the next surface was always better than the one under your feet. Kazakhstan taught me that staying still is sometimes the only move available, that there is a particular kind of power in being exactly where you are, in full view of everyone, and refusing to perform. I didn't know that going in. I know it now. That's usually how it goes with the things worth knowing.